How's it going, Exile? So, as we all know, our favorite Cast on Freeze Comet build has been nerfed to the ground basically, but I still want to give you an alternative you can play without changing all that much in your gear or skill tree. Because I know you have been building to that build for a long time, and now the build is basically gutted, so what to do now? Well, you can basically use this build I'm showing you now, because I'm playing it, you might have seen it on stream or not. It is not the strongest build, but it's a build you can play with pretty much the exact same gear and the exact same passive tree, so if you don't have all the gold to refund your passive tree, this build can still be played just fine. This build is still great on bosses. The nerf doesn't affect bosses at all pretty much, so the Frostbolt and the Comet combination is still great for taking out bosses. It's good for taking out elites and rares as well. It is not as good anymore to take out the white trash mobs on maps. That being said, I'm basically putting more damage into the Frostbolt now, and I'm mixing in Archmage now to basically double my frost damage together with the Ring of the Brotherhood. So overall, it still works nice. I'm getting to maps just fine. Everything is still get frozen, so I'm very defensive. I don't have to die a lot by just crazy mobs charging me, not being crowd controlled fast enough. So it's still working just fine if you ask me. So this is definitely not like an S tier, top tier build, but this is something still might be worth playing, and I really like the fantasy with all the ice walls shattering, the comets, so it really feels powerful playing it, even though this is definitely not like a high tier speed farming build. I'm right now doing maps tier 4 and 5, and I will probably get to like tier 6, 7, maybe even 8 before I will transition out of this build, but I thought I'm gonna share this build anyway because I'm continuing to play this for a couple of days now. So this time I have an extra section for every skill I'm using in this build, so make sure to check the description down below if you just want to jump to a skill you're interested in. Also check the description down below for the planner on Mobalytics, that's completely updated and up to date right now. And now, without further ado, let's start going with the passive skill tree. Let's take a look at our passive tree. Let's start with the Ascension. So I basically use Constant Gale with Arcane Surge, and I use the Force of Will to have it basically 1% increased effect on maximum mana. So you have to look at Arcane Surge, so it basically says more, right? So Arcane Surge grants more cast speed and more mana regeneration. So this is a multiplier. This is not just additively stacking on top of everything. So as you get more mana, this will basically give you a crazy amount of mana regeneration and cast speed. Again, I only have like 2k mana at this point, but as soon as I get like into the 3 to 4k mana range, this is really going to pay off. And then we use the elemental damage into the Scouring Winds here, and this basically just gives us 20% extra resistance on exposure. So it basically doubles the effect on exposure. So that really helps getting mobs to have as low resistance as possible. And as soon as I get my remaining 2 points here, I will go into Heavy Snows. So that just makes that I can put 2 chills on the mobs, so it's greatly going to reduce the action speed of mobs, but I don't have it yet. So for our tree, I basically go as defensive as possible. So I get everything which is basically energy shield, right? I get energy shield here, energy shield here, energy shield faster recharge. I get the big energy shield nodes here. And then obviously we go for like these mandatory damage nodes here. We go for the penetration of cold resistance. That's very good. We still get like some critical here. I don't know if it's worth it in the end because these are relatively low, but it also gives you like some cast speed. But these might get out of the tree if I do like some revisions. Then here we increase our exposure even more. Then we have all these ice passives here because we are just doing frost damage. Then we have another crit one, but this one also reduces enemy critical hit chance, so I guess this is a very defensive node. Then we get here the extra maximum mana. We want to have as much mana as possible. This gives us spell damage per 100 mana. This is also going to scale as we are going, since this has no cap. And this basically gives us mana regeneration while moving. We are most of the time moving. So usually I'm always pushing forward, casting Frostbolts. And you know, once in a while you are stationary, but most of the time you're actually moving. Then we get the big int node, and again, this is also like a very big energy shield node here. And then for the frost nodes, I still have like more frost nodes here, and I'm still not playing heavy frost. Again, if somebody of you guys knows better, let me know in the comments down below if this actually ignores, so if this basically disables exposure or not. I'm not 100% sure. I still have to do more testing on this, if this is actually a negative or positive, because people kept saying if you ignore resistance, exposure doesn't work, curses do not work. I'm not entirely sure if it's correct or not. So again, if you know better than me, which is certainly possible, let me know in the comments down below if I can actually pick this node or not. And then we have even more critical here. So then we have the jewels left. So for the jewels, I try to get mana generation and freeze buildup. So that's my primary goal. So this is a very good one. But usually mana regeneration would be the best you can get. You can also get faster start of energy shield, which I also find quite nice. And here I have like another mana regeneration and cold damage one. And yeah, on the left side here, we even have more energy shield. So really very, very defensive tree overall. Alright, so let's talk about the skills we are using. So I'm going to explain every single skill and the usages, and I will put footage on the right so you can see what I'm relating to. So first of all, we have Frostbolt. So Frostbolt is our main damaging skill. Since I know that this is not the best damaging skill, there's probably skills which do way more damage than Frostbolt, but the point of this build is to give you something to transition in from the nerfed build, which has been the Comet Cast on Freeze, right? Since Comet Cast on Freeze has been heavily nerfed, we're basically moving our main damage into Frostbolt here. So for that, we take out all like the non-damaging stuff of our Frostbolt and we put all the damaging stuff in. So we put in leverage, 50% increased critical hit chance. We put in scatter shot. That is like before, you know, we just get 2 more casts basically, we need it. Then we have glaciation here for the more freeze, because we still want to freeze stuff instantly. And last but not least, I have arcane tempo here for the increased attack speed. So why do we use still Frostbolt? Well, it just freezes everything pretty much still instantly. It's a very convenient way of going through. And again, it doesn't really require any other build. So as you can see in the footage, we basically just keep spamming Frostbolt and we keep moving with Frostbolt. So it's important that we always precast Frostbolts, because these are pretty slow and we don't want to have mobs in our face and then start casting Frostbolts. We want to start casting Frostbolts and then want to have mobs in our face. And we are basically spamming Frostbolt all the time. Archmage is basically what we use instead of like cast on critical and any kind of crazy combinations with cast on, because these all have been pretty much nerfed. So right now mainly we use Archmage now. So what Archmage does is the more mana we have, the more damage it gives us. Pretty simple. It also increases our mana cost, so this basically scales with maximum mana and mana regeneration. So we want to basically stack as much mana and mana regeneration as possible to make this build run smooth. And so what it does, on my level, it gives 6% of damage per 100 mana. So I have roughly 2k mana, so this is going to be a 120% damage buff. The problem is, this basically counts as lightning damage. So as we only have like cold exposure and minus cold res with the curse, hypothermia and so on, this lightning damage actually doesn't benefit from a lot of our skills. It still works, it's still a decent damage increase, but we basically have a way of boosting the damage, but more to that later. So first of all, let's see what we're playing. So we don't really have any good support gems for Archmage, so we're just going to play Lightning Mastery, so it gets 1 level, and then we're going to play Clarity on it here, so it just gives us more mana regeneration basically, because we don't really have any useful support for Archmage anyway. So what it does, it gives us lightning damage. So we don't want lightning damage, we want frost damage, right? So what we do is we use the Call of the Brotherhood ring. So you can pick this up. It's roughly 10 to 12 exalts. It's not crazy expensive and has decent stats actually. The freeze build-up helps us a lot, the increased mana regeneration as well, and it converts 100% of lightning damage to cold damage. So what happens is, we basically get 120% extra lightning damage, then we convert it to cold damage, and then all our exposure, all our reduced resistances on the mobs works for this damage as well. So what it actually does, it more than doubles our damage at this point, and as you keep getting more mana, let's say you get 3,500 mana, this will triple or even quadruple your entire damage by just putting this simple Archmage gem on here. So Comet we actually have 2 times on our bar. We have it for self-cast. This is our main damaging ability against bosses and single target, but it also has huge AoE and helps us shattering our frost walls and deal even more AoE with the frost walls shattering. So whenever you're in dicey situations, basically you just wall off everything with frost walls, and then you just launch the Comet on the frost wall, so it's going to shatter the frost walls and pretty much going to destroy everything in a huge AoE. And you can see it on the screen right now how that actually works. So for Comet we play the following supports. We play Unleash here, so basically what it does is it launches 2 Comets every time, because we are not going to use this all the time, so we're always going to have it like charge up for like 2 seconds, so we're always going to launch basically 2 of the Comets. Then we use Inevitable Critical here. Again, since we don't cast it all the time, it can build up an extra 100% critical strike chance over 4 seconds, so we pretty much always going to get critical. Well, not always, but we're going to have a very high crit chance. Then we're going to use the Considered Casting. So the skill has less cast speed. We really don't care about that because, you know, again, we only launch it like once in a while and it just gives like 25% more damage. And last but not least, we have Super Critical here. So it means we have 20% less critical hit chance, but the critical hit chance of this is still very, very large. And we get 100% increased critical damage bonus. It gives us a total of like 28k DPS in this setup here with 17 level Comet. And again, this is mainly used against rare mobs, blue mobs, and to shatter your frost walls. Obviously, it's also going to be used on bosses, but generally on bosses, the frost wall does more damage than the Comet. So Cast on Freeze has been heavily nerfed, but let's understand what this nerf actually does. So the new way it works is the following. You need 300 energy to cast a Comet. And you basically get 10 energy per power of frozen enemies. So power means basically a normal mob will give 1, a magic mob will give 2, a rare mob will give 5, and a boss gets 20. So what does this mean? So you have a base energy buildup of 10, and I have an energy gain modifier of 91% here. That means I actually get 91% extra, right? So that being said, a white mob basically gives us, let's just make it 20 right now for the sake of being more simple. So white mob gives us 20. So we have to basically freeze, what is this, 15 white mobs to get a Comet, which is, you know, not that great, but it's still like every second pack of white mobs is gonna get dropped a Comet. For magic monsters, it's 2. So you basically have to freeze roughly like 7 or 8 magic mobs to drop a Comet. So if you later have larger pack sizes and you get 8 magic mobs, you can still freeze them all and still drop a Comet. For where it's 5, so it's not really so important on rare mobs, and on bosses it's 20. So this is still very, very strong against bosses, because, you know, 20 times 10 is 200, times 9 is basically, when you freeze a boss, it drops a Comet, right? So it still does work. It's definitely not as strong as before, but I still find it very useful to play. Yes, you're not going to get it on every pack, but you're still going to get it. So let's not talk about this anymore. So I'm still using it because, you know what, the spirit is there anyway, and I don't really have better use for it whatsoever. So we use the Cast on Freeze, we're still with Comet, and then we have the Spell Echo, so we don't really care about the less cast speed here because it gets cast by us automatically anyway, and it just basically gives us the double damage here, right? And then we use Impetus here for the 40% increased energy gain. That is very important. And that basically just, you know, once in a while drops a Comet, as I said, drops a Comet on every elite pack, drops a Comet on every second white pack, and drops probably a Comet on like every second rare or something like that. And that Comet actually contributes a lot to killing stuff, especially on bosses. If you freeze the boss multiple times, you always get like these 2 extra Comets drop, which greatly help you to take out the bosses as fast as possible. So Frostbolt is probably the most important skill in this setup. Also, I really like the design of this spell. I really like walling everything up and then blowing it up with the Frostbolt together. It feels very, very good if you ask me. So what do we do with Frostbolt? First of all, everything which has a large model. So it may be a boss, but it may also be a mob with a large model. A good part of the crystals instantly explodes on it. So if you drop this on a large model or a boss, half of the crystals like already explode and it does huge damage. So that being said, that is the first use of Frostbolt, just raw damage output. Second use is basically walling stuff up. So for example, if you have archers which fire physical arrows, you can just wall them off and they are not going to hit you. Or if you get into like a dicey situation or you see like a lot of mobs charging into you, you can just wall them off with Frostwall and then conveniently shatter the Frostwall with your Comet and everything is going to blow up. And third use is basically just boss fighting. So boss fighting, if it has a huge model, like a large boss model, Frostwall basically instantly freezes. So you would just open with, you know, your curse and your exposure from Frostbomb, and then you would just cast Frostwall. It instantly freezes the boss. Then you start dropping the meteors. The meteor from cast on freeze automatically gets dropped, and you know you can basically kill bosses very, very fast with this setup. So what do you play for Frostwall? So I play Deep Freeze. So again, this is mainly for bosses. If I put it on bosses, they get frozen by the frost wall, and I want to have the longest freeze possible on the bosses. That's just why I have Deep Freeze on here. So that's definitely kind of optional. You don't have to use this. Then we have Spell Cascade. Basically means Spell Cascade basically means we're just gonna cast 3 Frost Walls, right? So it's just gonna, you know, litter all the screen with Frost Walls. And then we have Icicle here, so the ice spikes have a little bit less life, so you can shatter them easier with Frost Orb, with Frostbolt, it's called, yeah. You don't need it if you only want to shatter it with Comet. You can shatter it with Comet without Icicle, but I don't really have a better support gem to use on this right now anyway. So while we are casting Frostbolt, we always want to put Frostbomb on the packs of mobs. Frostbomb is gonna apply exposure, and in this build, exposure does, at my case, minus 78% frost resistance. So this is very important. Without exposure, you're basically not gonna do any damage to the mobs. So we do Frostbomb. It does a decent amount of damage by itself, but mostly for exposure. So that's why we basically play the Strip Away here, which gives us increased effect of our exposure. So mainly the main reason for playing Frostbomb is really exposure. Then we have the Ingenuity here. It just gives us more cooldown reduction, because it takes very long to cast Frostbomb. The cooldown is very high. So with this, we can cast it more often. So we'll pretty much have it available on every single trash pack. And then last but not least, we play the Magnified effect for it to have more AoE. So as you can see in the footage, we always cast Frostbomb. Then you can see the mobs get like this light blue shimmer. And then we basically launch it with, then we basically nuke it with our Frostbolt and the mobs are dying. Also, in boss fights, this is obviously something you want to put on the boss. So rotation is always going to be, you're going to curse them, then you're going to put the exposure on them, then you're going to start nuking them with Frostwall and Comet. Hypothermia is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be an extra curse which applies additional minus cold resistance. So as far as I understand it, this basically stacks with exposure. So you can have minus rest from exposure, which is Frostbomb, and you can have even more minus rest from hypothermia. I don't know if there's like a cap somewhere, but for now I'm just gonna assuming these stack like 100%. If not, you know what, probably somebody else is smarter than me in this game and knows better. So if you know better, just let me know in the comments down below, and I would absolutely appreciate that. So we play Hypothermia. I don't really use it on white mobs. I mainly use this on rares and magic mobs, like blue mobs, but on white mobs I don't really use it because it's actually not worth the cast. And then we use it with Expand, so it has more area of effect. We use it with the Ritualistic Curse, so it has even more increased area of effect. And then we use it with the Hate and Curse, so we have more effectiveness. And the way that it works, we just put it on the mobs or we put it on the boss, and it lowers the resistances, and it just makes it take more frost damage. Not much more to say about that. Sigil of Power is pretty simple. I just have it on my weapon swap. I barely use it. So if you swap your weapon, you basically just need like a Chiming Staff, which gives you Sigil of Power. So what does it do? Well, once you stand in it, it gives you basically 15% more spell damage. And as it gains stages, it gets like 30, 45, 60 and so on. So you can get like 4 to 5 stages, and this effectively almost doubles your damage then. That being said, I only basically use this on boss fights or when I'm stationary. For example, if I'm like doing expedition, for example, I just spam my stuff into the expedition and I just stand in the Sigil of Power and it gives me significant bonus damage and that don't really cost me anything to have a weapon swap. So I want to say one thing about weapon swap because I feel like it's kind of confusing. So sometimes you don't switch your weapon back because you have to actually set this up, right? If you use Sigil of Power and you cast it, it's not going to switch your weapon back automatically. What you have to do is you have to enable all your other spells here at the bottom with used with weapon set. By default, this is highlighted on both. So if you have to uncheck this too, basically, so it only switches back on every other skill. As you can see, I have this on Frostbolt, I have this on Comet. Actually, I don't have it on Comet, that's a mistake. So you want to make sure that all these are basically weapon set 1. So you will automatically switch back after casting the seal.